विष्णु भाई। एडमिट करें। Good morning, friends. Today, on behalf of VIPCA, I, Vikash Bathwal, as VIPCA Seminar Committee Chairman, welcomes you all on today's Sunday morning for a seminar program on valuation for startups and requirement of valuation for merger and amalgamation. As we know that we are having a central council member and regional council member elections, and we are very happy to know that the result has already been declared. We wish all the best for the nominated members, and it is a pride for VIPCA that 3 committee members, Mrs. Sushil Goel, Sushil Goel has already been declared as a winner, and Mayur Agarwal and CA Vishnu Tulsian is almost on the way to win. VIPCA congratulates them and wish all the best. Secondly, I want to share that in the last month, we have organized a full-day seminar on startups and capital market, and there was huge response from the chartered accountants and other professionals, and made that program a grand success. So we thought that we should hold such program regularly. On that basis, today we plan to organize a small program on startup for valuations of the startups and requirement of valuation for merger and acquisition. And today, our guest speaker, CA Vikash Goel, who is academic very sound, and with his professional knowledge, he will share his views on valuation, how the valuation of startups has been made, and requirement of valuation for merger. Thank you. Now I request our president, CA Bajrang Agarwal, to give his opening remarks. Thank you. Over to Bajrang.
Thank you, Vikash Bathwal, the program chairman of the seminar committee. Welcome, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, a very Sunday good morning to all the delegates. I Bajrang Agarwal, on behalf of VIP Road Chartered Accountant Study Circles, welcome our own member as well as speaker of the today's seminar, Shri Vikash Goel ji. I also welcome all the delegates who present via virtual platform for the today's seminar. One more, today is a very happy moment for all of us. I also congratulate all the winner of the Central Council members as well as regional councils members. I also wish him all the best for the next 3 or 4 year sessions. Friends, today our program subject is valuation on startups and valuation for merger and acquisition. This is very attractive topics, and I believe this topic is very useful to the new professionals, and I believe that these topics must get benefit from all the delegates who present here. With these words, I hand over the proceedings to the Neeraj Kejriwal to give formal introduction of our speaker, CA Vikash Goel. Thank you. Over to the Neeraj. नीरज तुम्हारी आवाज नहीं आ रही है yes okay
welcome Vikash ji on behalf of VIP Road Study Circle I will sound
okay
आवाज नहीं आ रही है
आ रही है
welcome Vikash ji आ रही है hello welcome Vikash Goel ji am I audible
yes Neeraj, carry on.
We are the study circle. I welcome you, and it's my privilege to introduce Vikash Goel ji to the esteemed audience. Vikash Goel ji is a professional entrepreneur with an experience of close to 15 years spanning across the industry and consulting. He has worked with companies like PwC, EY, ICA, and Jax Research in India and Canada. He currently heads OmniFin Solutions Private Limited and OmniFin Valuation Services OPC Private Limited. Vikas has led valuation engagements across a spectrum such as valuation for startups, listed entities, and conglomerates, valuation for merger, acquisition, and demerger, valuation of intangibles such as patent and brands, valuation of securities, equity, preference shares, complex derivatives for issuance, financial reporting, and taxation, valuation of business for litigation, corporate actions, and more. Vikas has authored multiple books on valuation, publisher Bloomsbury, with a strong leadership among working professionals. He has also conducted training sessions on valuations with various institutes of national repute, large consulting firms, and working professionals. Now I request Vikas celebration. Over to Vikas.
Thank you very much, Neeraj ji, Bajrang ji, and Vikash. Thank you. Good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for coming on a Sunday morning. Without wasting any time at all, I would just confirming if you can see my screen, and we will get going with the topic straight away. Can you see my screen?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So our topic for today is valuation for startups and mergers and acquisitions. Of course, these are two broad topics, which of course requires a lot of time, but I will try and condense the key points which could benefit our fellow members within almost 1.5 hours to quarter to 2 hours. So when we talk about startups, right, it's a very, very hot topic. I mean, I'm sure all of us are aware that only in the year 2021, we have got almost 70 unicorns in this country, almost 70 unicorns. And the unicorn is a company which has got $1 billion of valuation, which is about 7,500 crores of valuation. So while we will talk about how a startup is valued, right, we have to understand that many of you may feel that on one side of the story, there are some of us who believe that India is an extremely attractive market. There is a huge growth opportunity here, and there are so many startup companies which are mushrooming, and it's all good things. Of course, it's a good thing. And then there is a set of people or set of us who would believe that no, all of this is a bubble, right? Itni valuation kaise ho sakti hai, and how can you command such high valuations? So being at the helm of the affairs, right? Being a part of the ecosystem, we see both sides of the stories coming up. We have regular interactions with the venture capitalists, with the investors, with the founders. And yes, to a certain extent, both sides are correct, right? So today we will talk a little bit about how can you value startups, and we will also talk about some of the reasonable assumptions, and we will also talk about some of the assumptions which are completely unfounded. I mean, and some of these investments or some of these valuations are completely irrational. We'll talk about both sides of it with some examples. So basically, whenever we are talking about a startup company, right, their valuation is done throughout the life cycle of the entity. So whether a company was just born yesterday, and the company needs to get some funding, right, even from its founders, even from its promoters. We all know that as chartered accountants, I mean, there is a requirement for valuation which is required under Section 62 of the Companies Act. And then there is valuation which is required under the other provisions as well. So if there's a private placement, you need under Section 42. There is a requirement under income tax laws, Section 56, the rule or versus Rule 11 UA, which requires how a valuation needs to be done, right? And then if the funding is coming in from a foreign investor, there are valuation requirements through under FEMA regulations as well. When a company becomes a little matured, then there may be mergers and acquisitions, there may be corporate debt restructuring, there may be compliances, right? Bank funding. In all of those cases, valuation is required. And then again, even if the company is in a declining stage, the valuation is required under insolvency provisions as well. So our majority of our discussion is going to be around early stage valuations and valuation for mergers and acquisitions. First part, we will talk largely on the early stage valuations. Now, whenever we talk about a startup, essentially a startup is a private company. A company is a company which is not very old, barely. So by definition, a startup company is something which was formed less than 10 years ago. So the moment a company is more than 10 years old, it goes outside the definition of a startup company under the regulations, right? So what are the key issues? Now, of course, when we look at a listed company, right? When we look at a Reliance Industries or a TCS or an Infosys and things like that, there are established models out there, right? And those models tell you how to value those companies. Of course, there's a lot of market inefficiencies in place, but there are set models, and those businesses have been operating for a very long time. There are large number of players who are involved in the transaction or trading of those companies. But private companies are very different in terms of how they operate or how they can be valued. So some of the key issues that we come across in terms of private valuation of private companies is that there is no market value of either debt or equity. There is no comparable company, right? I mean, the company is privately held. Now, before I go further, let me highlight this, that of course there would be a startup company and there would be a private company. Now, all startup companies are private companies, but all private companies are not startup companies, right? As practicing chartered accountants, some of us may have got companies or some of our clients which are privately held, but which may not really fall under the definition of a startup company. So we'll keep discussing on both of those lines, with the primary focus being startup companies. And also, if I don't know if all of you can unmute yourself on your own, or would I have to unmute you as a host if there are questions?
Okay.
Everyone can unmute themselves, or मुझे unmute करना पड़ेगा उनको?
No, everyone can unmute themselves.
They can do that. Huh? So if there is any question, please feel free to talk. I mean, I have not kept a separate Q&A session, so feel free to ask questions throughout the session. Okay. The second issue that we come across is that there is insufficient or inadequate listed comparable companies. So if you are coming up with a startup company and you need to value that company, it is very difficult to compare that company against some other company. So for example, today, if we have to value Infosys, so we know that Infosys is a technology company, right? It's an IT company, and there are comparable companies. So there's going to be a Wipro, or there's going to be a TCS, which is also in the similar industry. So we have got benchmarks. Similarly, if we are looking at a steel company, we look at other comparable steel companies. We look at a real estate company, we look at other real estate companies. But in case of private companies or startup companies, there is hardly any listed comparable companies. For example, if you look at Byju's today, right, one of the unicorns. Now, how do you know any company which could be considered as a comparable company as compared to Byju's? There's hardly any. And even if there is, most of those companies are very small companies, right? So Byju's cannot be valued against a listed comparable company. So that is another key challenge that we come across when we value startups. A very, very important difference in terms of a startup is this, that these companies have got extremely non-transparent, right, opaque financial statements. A lot of these would have fictitious revenues and discretionary spends. Now, this is a very, very important point. Think about it, right? And I'm sure most of us are familiar with this. When you have a listed company, the listed companies are subject to a lot of regulations, right? So there's going to be auditors, there's going to be SEBI, there's FEMA, and there are, more importantly, there are financial analysts who track those listed companies. And then there are analyst calls and there are conference calls. So the company is very responsible. They have to be extremely high on disclosures and reporting framework. But in case of a private company or a startup company, right, it's a privately held company. So wo kuch bhi revenue charge kare, they're charging whatever revenue they want. Right, there are, I mean, of course, even the auditors are privately are probably are not doing as much work as they should in terms of a private company audit. So the biggest problem with a private company valuation or a startup company valuation is their financial statements. Just imagine, I mean, a company which was born yesterday, right, comes to you and tells you that, sir, we want to value this company and we are going to the investor to raise 10 crore rupees. Now, against 10 crore rupees, they will give a maximum of 10% stake. So this means that the company is looking at an approximate valuation of about 100 crore rupees. 100 crores of valuation. On what? So the company was born yesterday. All they have is a spreadsheet which talks about how their revenues will flow, how their expenses will flow. They have a PowerPoint presentation which talks about an idea that this is how this company is going to grow. And they have some experience. So the founders would have worked in an Amazon or a Flipkart, and they have demonstrated that they have worked in a startup company. And that's all. And simply based on these three documents, right, with no established business model, with no proof of concept, they come to you and they say that sir, we need a valuation of 100 crores. And guess what? There are some takers for this valuation. Now, even if a company was born maybe 2-3 years ago, now they have to get valuation because now they are into a second round or maybe the third round, and they have to show financial statements. Now think about it, right? I mean, have you heard of this term called GMV? Right? I have a very interesting story to say, and let me pull up an Excel file and show you. So here's can you see my Excel file as well? Yes. So there was a friend of mine who started manufacturing leather wallets, and he tells me that, Vikash, can you go to this portal and buy 10 wallets? Right? This portal is giving wallets at 600 rupees. The MRP is 1000 rupees. So I was like, no, but I don't need 10 wallets. Then he says, no, Vikash, these are my wallets and you're getting a 40% discount. So this wallet is not going to be available at 40% discount anywhere else. So I said, like, bhai, agar if you are my friend and it is your wallet, why should I buy from the portal? I would rather buy it from you. So he said, no, Vikash, even I will not be able to give it to you for 600 rupees. My costing itself is, let's say, 750. So I said, but I still don't want 10 wallets. Mujhe chahiye nahi, main kyun lu? So he says, Vikash, you should support me. I said, nahi, bhai, you have to tell me what's the catch here. Now, the selling price is 600 rupees. The MRP is 1000 rupees. The portal, right, gives 85% of the MRP to the manufacturer. 85% of the MRP to the manufacturer. Please note this very carefully. And the portal decides the price. Okay. The portal has decided a price of 600 rupees. Now think about this, what is happening here. If I talk about VG, that's me, and then there is manufacturer, and then there's portal, right? Let's say who gives what and who gets what. So if I buy 10 wallets, I would be paying 6,000 rupees, right? the portal will be getting 6,000 rupees. Correct? The portal is going to pay 8,500 rupees, that is 85% of the MRP to the manufacturer, isn't it? And the manufacturer gets 8,500. Now the catch was, he said that Vikash, if you don't need those wallets, right? You give me the 10 wallets back and I will give you your 6,000 rupees back. Are you understanding what's happening here? He says, give me the 10 wallets back. I will give you your 6,000 rupees back. And who's going to give it to me? The manufacturer, right? So if you look at the net position, I am at a zero-sum game. The manufacturer earns 2,500 and the portal loses 2,500. And imagine if this was 100 wallets, this number would have still just been multiplied by 10 again, right? Now, when we look at this transaction appears to be a very irrational transaction from a business perspective. But what the portal was really looking at is an MRP of the transaction. Because for the portal, the MRP of that transaction was 10,000 rupees. Right? And this is what drives the value. The portal, which was a startup. Ronak, can you unmute yourself, please, sir? Okay. So the catch here is, of course, the portal doesn't exist today because at some point the investors' money dried out. But the portal was trying to get as much gross merchandise value as possible. This is the GMV, which drove the value of this company. So the investors are not worried about whether the company is earning profits or not. The investors were simply worried about how much value of goods the portal is selling. But of course, this is fictitious, right? Because if the portal is increasing the discount, the revenue comes down, the losses increases, but the gross merchandise value still goes high. And guess what? This happens even today. This is a 10-year-old. This is at least a 7-year-old story, and it happens even today. So if you're a seller on Meesho, for example, right? That's the same thing that happens there. Meesho is a new online apparel company, and if you're a seller on Meesho, probably the same model would be available to you as a seller. So when we look at the private companies, right? These are effectively fictitious revenues. And then there's discretionary spend. I mean, we see founders of these companies officially saying that we don't take any salaries, but all of their personal expenses are charged to the P&L. So again, a very, very big issue with respect to private or startup companies is discretionary spends, right? The founders are charging all of their personal expenses into the company's accounts. And even they are having very, very high discretionary spends, very expensive ESOPs, and so on and so forth. The other issue around private companies or startup companies is the presence of key managerial people. So it's the founder who drives the value of the company, right? So when we saw Zomato's IPO coming up, right, there was a lot of argument because there were some people who said that Zomato's IPO was very expensive. Zomato, the one that came even before Paytm. And then there were some people who said that the value of this company is primarily driven by the presence of Dipinder Goel, who's the founder of Zomato. Now, of course, I am not buying that story, but in a lot of early stage startups, the valuation of the company is driven by the presence of key managerial personnel or the founders, right? So, of course, the founders are driving the value. They are the ones who are bringing in the business. They are the face of the business and so on. So that's another important key issue. And again, the cash flow represents not only the potential of the business, but of the owners as well. So that's a follow-up point on the founders of the private companies. So when we look at these startup companies, right, it's very important to identify whether it's a management team which is driving the value, whether it is the founder who's driving the value, or they have a very broad-based professional team which is running the show. Taking a quick pause, and if there's any question at this point, I can address them or I'll keep going. Okay.
Yeah, you can carry on, sir.
Thank you. So Now, the other issue around private company valuations is that the business models are changing very fast, right? I'm sure if you've looked at even today's newspaper, and it has already started about a week ago, we've heard that Grofers is now called Blinkit, right? Now, what is Grofers? Grofers is an online app which used to sell you grocery items, right? So you would go on a Grofers and you could buy grocery items. And they said one of the highlights that Grofers had was that they would deliver the products to your doorstep in 10 minutes time. That's the key competitive advantage that Grofers got over some of the other companies like a Big Basket. Now, look at what's common between Ola and Uber and Swiggy and Zomato and Grofers and Big Basket. What's the most common thing, right? So if we look at it at a very narrow, from a very narrow perspective, we know that Ola and Uber are transportation companies. They are the companies in which we travel, right? When we look at a Swiggy or a Zomato, we know that they are food delivery apps, right? So you go to their app and order food and the food comes to you. When you look at a Big Basket or a Grofers, you go to their app and you order grocery items and they come to you and they sell you grocery items. But at the core of it, right, Ola and Uber have been present for almost 10 years now and they are still not profitable. Now, what's going to change in their business model that they will become profitable? When you look at a Zomato versus a Swiggy, again, right, they have been around for almost 10 years now and they're still not profitable. So it is very important for them to pivot into different businesses over time. And Grofer has just done that. Just imagine that now Grofer says that why only grocery items? We can sell you everything, right? Whatever you need, just tell us and we will deliver it to you in 10 minutes time, or it depends on what product you are ordering. So now, instead of just ordering a rice or wheat or potatoes on Grofers, tomorrow it's fairly feasible that Grofers is going to sell you cooked food as well, right? It's fairly possible that Grofers will say that, hey, you want to transport something, we'll act as courier services for you, something that Swiggy Genie is already doing. So now all of a sudden, a company which was a pure play grocery app will start competing with not only grocery companies, but with also a Swiggy or a Zomato or an Ola or an Uber, right? And probably even Amazon to a certain extent. So what's really going to happen is that as investors, we have been thinking that, hey, these are different businesses, but at the core of it, there are two things which are common to most of these businesses. One small app that is there on your phone, one icon on your phone on a small device that we hold. And second, the supply chain, the people who are delivering the products to you. And if you look at everything that's possible if you look at what kind of innovation would have happened in Ola and Uber or in Swiggy, Zomato, there's hardly any innovation in the last couple of years. And the only thing that we can imagine is going to happen is that they will expedite on the drone deliveries, right? I mean, आप कुछ order करोगे और आपकी खिड़की से वो deliver होगा rather than आपके door से, because it's going to be delivered through a drone. But again, imagine the amount of transactions we are talking about, the kind of population that we have, and how many drone deliveries would still be possible, right? So we have to be constantly aware of how the business models are changing and whether we believe in their story or not. So again, I'm not trying to become the devil's advocate. I'm not trying to say that all this is sham at all. No, of course, there's a very, very positive story around it. But from a valuation perspective, from an investor's perspective, if you are trying to invest into this business, right, we need to understand that a lot of it is going to be blind game, right? I mean, of the founder of Grofers or the founder of Zomato may not have a vision of what's going to happen 5 years from now. You ask a steel company promoter, they know what's going to happen 5 years from now. But the startup companies would not know, right? They're all only talking about possibilities, but there's hardly any plausibility or a vision that would be available 5 years down the line, because the market is changing very fast. The other thing around valuations is that operating profits may start coming in after 10 years, right? And when we look at financial projections, as chartered accountants, we know that when we are trying to value a company, we need to create financial projections. Now, kitne saal ka financial projection banayenge? So one of the key challenges that we find is that company says that we will grow at 4,000% per annum over the next 5 years. And wo fictitious spreadsheet pe model bana dete hain, which shows that they will become profitable after 2.5 years. Kaise hoga? How will they become profitable after 2.5 years? it's all story, right? वो story believable है ही नहीं. I mean, it's just not believable. So, of course, the projections have to be extended. So you need to make a 10-year projection. Now, how can you make a 10-year projection when you don't know what's going to happen after 5 years, right? So definitely, this is a very difficult exercise. We have to look at plausibilities. We have to look at possibilities. And with those possibilities, we have to assign probability ratios, right? So we say, okay, अगर आप grocery business में जाएंगे तो उसकी success probability इतनी है, उसकी ये value होगी. If you go into a transportation business, the probability of success is so much, the value would be so much, and so on and so forth. And again, a majority of the value may lie in investments. Think about Byju's again, right? This company is the most valuable edtech company in the world today, with almost $48 billion of valuation. Imagine the amount of money, or imagine the amount of valuation this company has been able to command, right? Now, think about this. If you look at where is the profit, or if you look at where is the cash flows, or if you ask for where are the revenues, right? If you simply look at their financial statements, even the projected financial statements, you will never be able to assign that value to this company. But now we see that a lot of this value, a lot of this fundraise is now being utilized into acquiring other companies. Byju's has acquired 15 companies in the last 1.5 years, or maybe about 2 years, right? Including Akash Institute, including White Hat Junior, right? They have made acquisitions outside of the country as well. They have made acquisitions in the US, and now they are saying that they might go for a listing in the US rather than in India through the special purpose acquisition company mode, right? So a lot of this value may lie into investments. We all know about InfoEdge, right? Everyone knows, you know, what's this company that does what is InfoEdge? What is it most famous for? InfoEdge क्या चीज के लिए famous है? Does anyone know that? I'm sure you would know that. Naukri.com, correct? So now, and InfoEdge got a very big boost with its valuation. Why? Because InfoEdge held a very large stake in Zomato. So when Zomato got on for public issue, InfoEdge was able to uncover a lot of this value, right? They were one of the early investors. Sanjeev Bikhchandani was one of the early investors in Zomato. And so InfoEdge's value was largely, a significant portion of InfoEdge's value also came from the investments. Similarly, when these companies are raising a lot of these funds may not, I mean, the value of the company may not come from its core operations only, but from its investments. And again, a lot of this value may lie in the terminal value. What is terminal value? So when we try to value a company, हम उसको दो parts में divide कर देते हैं. We talk about the next 5 years, and then we say for a perpetual period, right? So there is practically no action happening. There's no profit that's going to come in the first 5 to 7 years in a private company or in a startup company. So a lot of this value may come from terminal value, and we'll talk about a couple of those models in the next few slides. So how do you value these companies? क्या methods होते हैं? कैसे उनको value किया जाता है, right? So a lot of this valuation will come from our core, right? I mean, or honestly, when someone asks me that Vikash इसको value कैसे करते हैं, right? So I think the first thing that we need to understand is that there is always going to be an intuitive value, and always going to be an intuitive value. If you go to buy, अगर आप सब्जी नहीं खरीदते, if you're not a regular buyer of vegetables for your household, but still you are asked to go and buy potatoes, and the shopkeeper tells you that ये potato मैं 100 रुपए किलो बेच रहा हूँ, right? You've never bought potatoes, but you would not pay 100 rupees for a kilo of potato, right? Yes or no? Why wouldn't you? Because आपको एक sense है, right? कि इतने का नहीं हो सकता है. This should not be that valuable, plain and simple. There is always going to be an intuitive understanding of what should be the value of a company. So first of all, I think as a valuer, that is very important, that you should be able to assess the value without really getting into so many methods of valuation that are available, right? And then, of course, what we really do is we value the company based on some techniques. That's more of a justification. वो एक sense होना बहुत जरूरी है. I'm sure everyone knows about WhatsApp, right? Does anyone want to talk about WhatsApp? You know who owns WhatsApp? Who owns WhatsApp?
Facebook.
Zimmerman.
right?
Facebook.
Facebook ने WhatsApp को कितने में खरीदा? How much value was paid to acquire WhatsApp?
Around 800 crore.
$19 billion है. मैं इधर लिखता हूँ. Let me write in the Excel file. It'll be easier, right? WhatsApp valuation was USD 19 billion. Okay, that is about 1.5 lakh crores approximately. ऐसा ही कुछ आएगा ये value. Okay, now just imagine this company was acquired for $19 billion. Must have been very profitable. बहुत profit रहा होगा इसमें, right? It must have been very profitable. The revenue of WhatsApp in the year it was acquired was $10 million. Just imagine the difference, right? This was in 2013 approximately. Now, चलो ठीक है, $10 million का revenue रहा होगा. It must have been very profitable. Must have had, because खर्चा होता ही क्या होगा? What would have been the expenses for an app, right? There was a loss of $138 million in this company. Now, with this number, right, as chartered accountants, how can we justify a value of $19 billion? एक और important चीज बता देता हूँ. So the user base was 450 million. 450 million active users were there when the company got acquired. Now, can we ever assign this value of $19 billion to WhatsApp?
What is the current number of users?
Okay, so 2021, so this was 2013. 2021, the user is about 1.3 billion.
Wow.
Almost the entire population of India, right? But still, when we remember, try to recall when you had installed WhatsApp for the first time before 2013, before it got acquired, it used to say that it was free for first year and then 60 rupees every year, right? That was about USD 1 every year. Now, one could imagine that, okay, Facebook might have thought that, yeah, inke paas 450 million users hai, but only 10 million users are paying. So the company is not able to generate revenue from its users because there was a bug in the app, right? So you would, if they ever asked you to pay that $1, you would uninstall the app, reinstall the app, and it would work out. But then try to see, do you pay WhatsApp? Do you pay even 1 rupees for WhatsApp even today? We don't, because it has been acquired by Facebook, and Facebook says that we are free for life. So WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, we don't have to pay to use that app, right? Now, how can you assign a $19 billion to a company like WhatsApp, right? Because there is no revenue. Even today, there is hardly any revenue. Now think about it. Even if somebody said that, no, we will charge $1, we will charge $1 from every user, the total cap would have been how much? The revenue would be $1.3 billion. Correct? Even if somebody said that we will charge $1 from every person on the planet, इस धरती पे जितने लोग हैं सबसे हम $1 ले लेंगे, तो कितना रेवेन्यू हो जाएगा? 7.3 billion. That's the world population annually. उसके बाद में expenses जाएंगे, profit आएगा, cash flow आएगा ना. So 19 billion तो आ ही नहीं सकता. Correct? Now, another very interesting story is that Google had bid to acquire WhatsApp for USD 1 billion. अब बताइए. So on one hand, there is Facebook, a very large US tech giant. And on the other hand, there's Google, another very large global tech giant. And both the companies are valuing the same company, WhatsApp, around the same time. Google says, I'll pay you $1 billion. WhatsApp says, I'll pay you $19 billion. किसको valuation आता है? Does Google not know valuation? ऐसा तो हो नहीं सकता ना कि Google को valuation ही नहीं आता. मुझे hire कर लेते. So now that's where we say that valuation lies in the eyes of the beholder. Now, why would Facebook pay $19 billion to acquire WhatsApp? Now, there's another way. So interesting story is Mark Zuckerberg, who is the founder of Facebook, went down to Jan Combs' place 2 a.m. at night. रात को 2 बजे उसके घर पे गया और आधे घंटे के अंदर में 19 billion dollar की डील क्लोज करके वापस आ गया. And then he called up his CFO that, bro, we are acquiring WhatsApp for 19 billion dollars. जिसको हायर कराना है कराओ. Now the CFO was in the role of the CA, right? Now he had the revenue on top, he had the valuation at the bottom. कि भाई client है या मालिक है, ये दो नंबर फ्रीज हो गए. अभी इनको fill in the blanks करके 19 billion लाना है, right? That's the job of a valuer a lot of times these days, that we have to justify the valuation. We don't have to arrive at the valuation. But think about it, why would Facebook pay so much amount of money, right? That's because WhatsApp had got tremendous amount of information, isn't it? Think about this. It is possible that out of 50 odd people, 60 participants who are present, 2 लोग तो अभी भी WhatsApp देख रहे होंगे अपना, right? 2 minute का break होगा, we will check our WhatsApp. The first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is check your WhatsApp. Last thing, सोने के पहले WhatsApp ही check करके सोते, right? So WhatsApp has got a lot of information about us. That information helps Facebook generate more revenue from advertisement. It is a strategic asset for Facebook, right? आप एक WhatsApp पे connection को add करते हो और वही उस connection का connect request आपको Facebook पे दिख जाता है, suggested friends में दिख जाता है. You start your conversation around technology and you will see advertisements on technology on your Facebook page. So it's a strategic asset, right? Facebook knows about your conversations or about your interest areas through your conversations on WhatsApp. It doesn't spy on your conversation. The conversations are still encrypted. But of course, that doesn't stop Facebook from mining your information, right? There are a lot of ways of doing that. So that's where, so Facebook felt that if I have to generate the same amount of information about the users through my internal efforts, if I have to generate the same amount of information about the users through my internal efforts, would I spend less than 19 billion or more than 19 billion over a period of time, right? It realized that the amount of spending that Facebook would have to do to get the same amount of user information is going to be very, very expensive. Plus WhatsApp became a competition to Facebook. So it said, even if I'm paying $19 billion, it is still cheap. On the other hand, Google realized that, hey, मेरे पास में Gmail है, YouTube है, Google Chrome है, Google Maps है, Play Store है, right? इतने सारे apps हैं, Gmail है. So I don't need additional app to get the same amount of information because I'm already getting so much information about the users, right? So I am paying 100 times the revenue, isn't it? Right? I'm ready to pay 100 times the revenue. That's a good enough valuation that I'm going to pay to acquire WhatsApp. WhatsApp did not want to sell for $1 billion. Facebook offered 19 billion. They were happy to go. Right? So how do you look at the valuation in both the cases? The valuation now becomes from the perspective of the buyer rather than of the asset itself. Right? So we call it participant specific value. We don't call it fair value. We don't know what's the fair value of WhatsApp. But the investor had their own interests in mind when they invested into this company. Okay. So looking at some of the methods, right? Let's take one example and let's see how we can value a private company. Now we're not talking, this is a privately held steel company, right? Not a startup company. But if we have information like this, how can we value this company? So this is a company whose revenue, whose sales is 122,927 lakhs, just taken some random number. The profit after tax is 13,000 lakhs, right? That is 130 crores approximately. And the number of shares is 2823 lakhs. How would you value a steel company like this, right? Of course, we would prepare a CMA data, we would prepare financial projections and all of that, which is a fairly large exercise. But if there is an external investor who is willing to invest into this company, right, the external investor will not go through the DCF approach. He will not go to the discounted cash flows and financial projections and all of that. They will do a simple back of the envelope calculation. And how would you do a back of the envelope calculation? So they will look at, let's say, some of the comparable listed companies, Usha Martin, Sunplac, Adhunik, Kalyani, GSW. When you pick up some of the comparable companies, you also identify what would be the important value drivers. So in this case, let's say we take two value drivers, price to sales multiple and price to earnings multiple. Okay. Again, I have put that information in an Excel file. So let's say here, right? So we have the revenues. All this revenue is in rupees lakhs. Then we have EPS, which is rupees. We have number of shares, average price, P. So with this, we can calculate the PE ratio and the price to sales ratio, right? Let's calculate the PE ratio. We have price divided by EPS. That's the PE ratio. Everyone's able to follow. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We can discuss it. I don't want to go too fast on this. Okay. Similarly, we can calculate the price to sales ratio. So we have revenue. Okay, we have the average price multiplied by the number of shares. That will give me the market cap of the company divided by revenue into 1 lakh, because this revenue is in lakhs of rupees. So I get a price to sales ratio. So these are the comparable companies, and we have identified two value multiples. Okay. Now with these two value multiples, I can take the average of these. Now, do you find any problem with this average? Anyone? कोई problem दिख रहा है क्या इस average में? Let's quickly check if everyone's paying attention. Are you there? Because I can only look at my screen. I can't look at your faces. Can anyone see any problem in the average? So you see that Adhunik Industries is an outlier here, right? Because of this, the average has gone up significantly. So we could either remove this, so the average would come at 5.36, or we can take a median weight multiple, which would give me a more plausible number. And with this median, I can calculate the value of the company. Now see, I have got a range of value, right? Between 92,000 lakhs and 81,000 lakhs. So the value per share would be anywhere between 28 and 32 rupees. So a very quick way of evaluating what should be the value of a company, where you don't really have to look at the discounted cash flows or very long drawn calculations. Even when you calculate the value using DCF, it should come in the same range, right? May not be the exact value, but it should come in the same range of value, right? So that's some of the quick ways of valuing companies, right? We have this here as well. Now, let's say if you have to value a Flipkart, right? How can you value Flipkart, which is, of course, a startup company? It's a matured startup now. But how can you value an e-commerce company, which is very dynamic, right? Which is very large again. So we'll see that it becomes very difficult to value a very large organization, because you don't know how the projections would be prepared. अगले 5 साल में वो कंपनी की वैल्यू कैसे होने वाली है, उसके रेवेन्यूज क्या होंगे, we hardly know it. So again, the valuation can be done based on a comparable company if there is. So that comparable company need not be in India. It could be in the US, right? So we can calculate Amazon's value per user. So again, let's say Flipkart's value would be driven by how many users are there on Flipkart. So we can calculate Amazon's value per user. So let's say Amazon's market capitalization, it's a listed company, you will get its market capitalization in the US divided by how many users are there on Amazon. There can be other value drivers as well. So now you get Amazon's value per user, right? So what would be Flipkart's value? we can take number of users on Flipkart multiplied by this Amazon's value per user. Correct? Now that can be the base value or the benchmark value for Flipkart. Then we will make other adjustments like lack of marketability, global diversity, product diversification. So Amazon has got a lot of other businesses. Flipkart has one core business, and Amazon is present in multiple countries. Flipkart is present only in India. Amazon derives its value in the US. Flipkart derives its value in India. Amazon is listed, so the shares can be easily traded. Flipkart is privately held, right? So there will be other factors that could be used to adjust, but you will get a starting point to value that, okay, itna value to aa hi jayega. Then there can be 15, 20, 25, 30% adjustment towards that value. Is it making sense at all? Any questions? Am I going okay? Is it too technical? Okay. All right. So another example is, let's say there's this chat messaging app, text messaging app, which is called Chat App. I'm giving a hypothetical company, Chat App, right? And it has got 1.6 million users. It's a new startup company that was born yesterday. Now, all it have is 1.6 million users. The revenues are zero. There is no revenue. How can you value this company? Okay. Any idea? Anyone wants to take a shot, take a guess? कैसे value करेंगे इसको? So once again, this is a zero revenue company. Now, if you are lucky, there is going to be a comparable company, right? So this is a chat-based company, which is a chat app, and it has got 1.6 million users. So what we can do is, again, now we have a benchmark, right? And that benchmark is, let's say, a WhatsApp. So once you understand what the company is going to do, and if the company says that, yes, we will be in the same lines as WhatsApp, right? Of course, there will be some interesting features, some new features, some not so new features, but we will be on the same lines as WhatsApp. So now we can compare this company against WhatsApp, right? So we know that WhatsApp value, enterprise value, was $19 billion. And we know that WhatsApp daily active users at the time of acquisition, that time, was 450 million users. So what will be the value per user for WhatsApp, right? So this can be $42, $42.22. Okay. Can I keep speaking? I think the host muted everybody. Okay.
Vikash, is just a minute.
Okay.
Hello. Vikash, I just want to know, okay, you were saying about Google.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
आवाज आ रही है विकास जी?
आ रही है. हाँ.
चलिए, ओके, स्टार्ट. नीरज, कुछ क्वेश्चन कर रहा था तुम? नीरज? हेलो. हेलो. रात देख तो क्या होता है? अनम्यूट कहाँ म्यूट ऑल करे क्या? हेलो
विकास जी आपकी आवाज आ रही है? आई थिंक नीरज जी इज म्यूटेड.
नीरज क्या बोल रहा तू? बोलो ना क्या अलाउ करे ना.
Yeah, now
हेलो
विकास जी.
हाँ आवाज आ रही है नीरज?
हाँ, अभी आवाज मैं अनम्यूट कर लिया हूँ अपने आप को.
हाँ ठीक है ठीक.
हेलो
Yes,
विकास
नीरज.
जी.
हाँ जी.
या वांटेड टू नो कि जैसे फेसबुक के केस में यू आर सेइंग कि गूगल हैज वैल्यूड एट $1 billion एंड फेसबुक हैज वैल्यूड व्हाट्सएप इन एट $19 billion. तो हाउ फेसबुक हैज डिराइव्ड द वैल्यूएशन ऑफ 19 बिलियन?
मैं वही बता रहा था सर. So there are different ways. So first of all, like I said, ultimately there is a transaction in which there has to be a buyer and a seller, and the buyer and seller mutually decide at what level the transaction will happen. So while there are stories which says that Google valued this company at 100 times the revenue, right? Of course, we don't know exactly कि Facebook ने क्या उसने क्या किया था, but basically for Facebook this is a strategic asset. So today Facebook derives a lot of information from WhatsApp through data mining, right? And through other avenues. So now we also have a WhatsApp for business. They're looking at WhatsApp for payments, but those factors or those concepts were not available at that time. So what Facebook realized was कि अगर उसको same amount of information चाहिए, जो so Facebook का revenue model क्या है? Facebook's revenue model is more in terms of generating advertisement revenue, right? आज हम लोग VIPCA का ये program अगर Facebook पे advertise करें versus एक hoarding लगाएं, which is going to be more beneficial, probably Facebook advertisement, because it will allow us to get targeted advertisements to a potential user. So Facebook gets information from WhatsApp, और Facebook ने देखा कि अगर वही information मेरे को internally generate करना पड़ता through my internal efforts, through getting more users on Facebook only, then the amount of money that Facebook would have to pay internally would probably be much higher than $19 billion. So as a negotiation, 19 billion was not a very expensive proposition for Facebook, whereas 19 billion probably did not make sense for Google, right? So it's more of a negotiation. It's not that exactly 19 billion aaya, right? Of course, in the internet, you will find some Excel models which says कि Facebook, WhatsApp का इतना revenue आता user base से, इतना other revenue से, but after 7 years also, WhatsApp does not generate any revenue for Facebook directly. So it's more of a capital budgeting thing कि मेरे को कितना maximum pay करना चाहिए इस asset के लिए, rather than कि इस asset की value क्या है मेरे को.
नहीं सर, जैसे अभी जैसे बहुत सारे OFS आ रहे हैं जिसमें प्रमोटर एग्जिट कर रहे हैं और पब्लिक को दे रहे हैं, तो ऐसा तो नहीं है कि पब्लिक को माला पहना के निकल गए 5 साल बाद?
सर ऐसा नहीं है, ये बोलना डिफिकल्ट है, बट ऐसा है ये बोलना भी डिफिकल्ट है, राइट? सो we are doing a little bit of those discussions around, right? So ultimately when we talk to a lot of these private equity investors, venture capitalists, yesterday I was talking to a venture capitalist. आप सोचिए, so these companies which are investing into startup companies today, जो $100 million का investment कर रहे हैं, they are taking less than 6 days to decide that they will invest that 100 million into this company. Less than 6 days. So less than 6 days के अंदर में एक आप proper due diligence भी नहीं कर रहे हैं, आप legal due diligence भी नहीं कर रहे हैं. There's a lot of private money that is floating around, and that those investors are willing to invest into their money. So it's अभी ऐसा situation है कि एक अच्छी startup company है जिसके पास में 4 round of investments हो चुके हैं, तो वो आपको कहेगा नहीं सर मुझे आपसे पैसे नहीं लेने, I don't want money from you. अभी companies are interviewing the investors rather than the investors interviewing the company at some stage beyond 2-3 rounds of valuation. So yes, हमने Paytm में देखा ही है कि ultimately who's the loser? The last man standing, who's a retail investor, is the loser. So OFS में तो ऐसा हो ही रहा है, बिल्कुल हो रहा है. और तभी सेबी का कंसल्टेशन पेपर आया, वो आपको बता रहा है कि आप कहाँ पैसे लगा सकते हो, where should you invest money? When I say you, I mean the companies, जो आप IPOs में पैसे उठा रहे हो, उस पैसे को आप कहाँ लगा रहे हो, उसको आप कितना OFS कितना रहेगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट कितना रहेगा, आपके ऑपरेशंस में कितना जाएगा. There are now cappings that is coming on in those things. So yes, it's a very risky play. Did I answer your question, Neeraj ji?
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
विकास जी,
हाँ जी सर.
पेटीएम का इतना बड़ा जो वैल्यूएशन था, फिर मार्केट में 25% to 30% डाउनफॉल आ गया, तो क्या रीजन था? बेसिकली पेटीएम का वैल्यूएशन ठीक था क्या? सही आपकी नजर में क्या उस पेटीएम के बारे में कुछ बताइए
सर. ऑफ कोर्स तो मैंने पर्सनली पेटीएम को वैल्यू नहीं किया, लेकिन थोड़ा सा राउंड अबाउट एग्जांपल देता हूँ सर. एक कंपनी जब बोनस इशू लेके आती है, व्हेन अ कंपनी अनाउंसेस, एक स्टैंडर्ड लिस्टेड कंपनी अगर एक बोनस अनाउंस करती है, तो यूजुअली प्राइस बढ़ जाता है ना कंपनी का, राइट? क्यों बढ़ जाता है? बिकॉज द परसेप्शन इज कि कंपनी में पास्ट प्रॉफिट्स है, कंपनी अपने शेयर होल्डर्स के बारे में सोच रही है दैट यस द कंपनी इज प्लानिंग टू गिव सम बोनस इशू टू द शेयर होल्डर्स, एंड कंपनी को फ्यूचर में प्रॉफिट चाहिए या कंपनी को फ्यूचर में इन्वेस्टमेंट चाहिए, इसलिए वो कैश प्रिजर्व करके बोनस दे दे रही, राइट? अदरवाइज बोनस से तो कंपनी में कुछ नया तो आता नहीं है. इट्स द सेम प्रॉफिट व्हिच इज कैपिटलाइजेशन ऑफ रिजर्व होता है. सिमिलरली फॉर पेटीएम, राइट, इट वाज द पोस्टर बॉय ऑफ द इंडियन फिनटेक इंडस्ट्री. जब डीमोनेटाइजेशन हुआ तो हमारे प्रधानमंत्री ऑन रिकॉर्ड कह रहे थे कि अरे व्हाई नॉट बी यूज कंपनीज लाइक पेटीएम फॉर डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शंस. देन वॉरेन बफे ने पैसे लगा दिए कंपनी में, टाटा जी ने पैसे लगा दिए कंपनी में. सो नाउ द कंपनी बिकेम टू बिग as a hype that yes, we are a global fintech company born out of India. So not that it's a bad company, no, I'm not saying it's a bad company at all, but the valuation of that company went on very high, very high. As see, we all know, right, आप MCA के records में जाते हैं तो आपको हर कंपनी के बहुत सारे documents मिल जाते हैं. So आपको कंपनी के valuation reports भी मिलेंगे, और उन valuation reports को जब आप डाउनलोड करो तो आपको पता चलेगा कि कंपनी के जो values निकल रही, जो उसके प्रोजेक्शंस बन रहे हैं, उन प्रोजेक्शंस का कोई सीन कुछ ही नहीं है, राइट? दे आर एक्स्ट्राऑर्डिनरीली हाई. सो द सेम थिंग हैपेंड इन केस ऑफ पेटीएम. टू मच ऑफ हाइप, राइट, एंड अ वेरी हाई वैल्यू. सो देयर वर सम वेरी क्रेडिबल एनालिस्ट हु सेड दैट द वैल्यू ऑफ दिस कंपनी शुड बी अराउंड 1200-1400 रुपीस. आज उस लेवल पे वैल्यू आ गई है उसकी.
सर, व्हाट इज द बेसिक रेवेन्यू ऑफ पेटीएम?
सर वही तो नहीं पता है ना, दैट्स द होल प्रॉब्लम. What is the key revenue model for Paytm? यही लोगों को नहीं पता है, ये कंपनी को भी नहीं पता.
Either they may sell the data.
नहीं, so data is ना. So today, so very interesting. Paytm, how do we know Paytm as a core company, right? Paytm is used to make transactions. आपको कैश नहीं कैरी करना है, आप पॉकेट में Paytm, आपके फोन पे Paytm है, you can use Paytm to transfer money. चाहे अपने फ्रेंड्स को देना है या चाहे आपको कुछ परचेज सेल करना है. That is what the core business of Paytm is, right?
They are also giving us the money for 100 rupees recharge.
हाँ,
just like cred भी जो है आ रही है सर, cred भी वही कर रही है.
बिल्कुल वही कर रही है. So problem with Paytm is कि when it started, of course it's a very interesting business model, but the problem is कि आज Paytm का competitor तो गवर्नमेंट खुद है, उन्होंने भीम चालू कर दिया. आप UPI से मनी ट्रांसफर कर दीजिए, आपको पैसे नहीं लगते. When Paytm started, वो कहा कि सर हम जब ट्रांजैक्शन करेंगे so we will be like a Mastercard or a Visa. So one party is going to pay 1.5 to 2% of the transaction amount. That's what Mastercard Visa does. Yes. So Paytm is an alternative to Mastercard Visa in a more lucrative manner. You don't need a credit card. आप मोबाइल फोन से ट्रांसफर. But now, in the last 4 years, the situation has changed drastically.
नहीं तो सर, whether the payment to whom Paytm is making, whether they charging commission from that party.
So not anymore. We wanted to. That was the core model.
Okay.
But there are so many alternatives. So there's WhatsApp Pay, there's Google Pay, there's Beam, there's UPI, there's Paytm. There's so many other options which are available. So now Paytm is not, उनका जो हम लोग टेक रेट बोलते हैं Paytm के केस में, कि आपने जितने के ट्रांजैक्शन किए उसमें से आपका रेवेन्यू कितना है. तो आज अगर मैं आपको एक Paytm करता हूँ, 5,000 रुपए मैं अपने फोन से आपके फोन पे ट्रांसफर करता हूँ, I don't have to pay anything. बट Paytm का एक्सपेंस या जो भी उसका मॉडल है वो तो उसी पे, मतलब इट इज सपोज टू टेक मनी, राइट, बट इट इज नॉट एबल टू. सो वैल्यू दिख रहा है बट वो वैल्यू है नहीं, इट इज नॉट देयर बिकॉज द कंपनी इज नॉट एबल टू जनरेट रेवेन्यू देयर. तो इसलिए अब वो क्या कर रहा है, वो अलग अलग मॉडल्स में जा रहा है. वो कह रहा है कि नहीं, मैं टिकट्स भी बेचूंगा, मैं मर्चेंट से. सो नाउ आई विल कम्पीट विद द बुक माई शो आल्सो. मेरे प्लेटफॉर्म पे टिकट खरीदो, टिकट बुक करो, मैं थिएटर वाले से पैसा लूंगा. So now they are trying all the other things.
That was the basic. I think that is the basic model of revenue.
Correct. But now it is very competitive now. सो पहले जो उनके पास में एडवांटेज था, जो कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज था, that competitive advantage is now lost because the business model is now diluted. So while the company is still valuable, इतना नहीं है जितना हम सोच रहे हैं कि वो है, जितना हाइप किया गया उतना नहीं है. Value is definitely there. So Paytm, I had a chance to interact with Vijay Shekhar Sharma on a platform, and they have got extensive investments in Japan. Unke one of the investor is SoftBank, which is again from Japan. So they have got very extensive investments in Japan. The positive side is that they can go to different countries and do the same business that they are doing in India. That's a positive side. But on the negative side, now they are too diversified. Now they don't know where to generate value, right? So there's plus and minus both on that front.
Sir, I have one question.
Sir.
सर मैं जानना चाह रहा था कि हाउ एंड व्हेन द वैल्यूअर कैन बी हेल्ड लायबल. समझिए जैसे पेटीएम का वैल्यूएशन है, अब अपने को देखिए मार्केट में रिलीज हुआ, अपने को पता चला कि इसका वैल्यूएशन बहुत हाई था, अचानक से मार्केट क्रैश हुआ, 70-80% जो भी इसका वैल्यूएशन क्रैश हुआ, तो वैल्यूअर लायबल हेल्ड हो सकता है क्या कि तुम वैल्यूएशन गलत निकाला है या द वैल्यूएशन वाज नॉट करेक्ट या समथिंग लाइक दैट?
Sir, if the same thing could have happened for a listed company, right? Reliance के प्राइस ऊपर नीचे, Infosys के प्राइस ऊपर नीचे, सत्यम के प्राइस ऊपर नीचे हो ही सकते हैं ना. वैल्यू कौन गलत निकाल रहे हैं? So the simple point is that the value is derived by market supply, demand and supply. आज आप अगर ये बोल भी देते हो कि नहीं तुमने वैल्यू गलत निकाला, पेटीएम बोलेगा देखो मेरे पास एक वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट है, देखो मेरे पास एक इन्वेस्टर है, देखो मेरे पास में बायर है. आपको ज्यादा लग रहा है, आप मत खरीदिए.
जैसे वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट में अपने राय कर गए ना, अपने डॉक्यूमेंट के ऊपर राय करके आईपीओ को प्लेस कर गए कि जैसे इसका डॉक्यूमेंट अच्छा है, इसका वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट अच्छा है, ये सब अच्छा है. अब वो वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट ही सही नहीं है तो उसको कौन देखेगा? उसको सेबी देखेगा कि उसको आईबीबीआई देखेगा? कौन देखेगा उसको?
नहीं. So okay, so first of all, in case of an IPO, the valuation report is not prepared and there is no need for a registered valuer or any valuer for that matter to prepare a valuation report for an IPO. IPO के केस में इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर्स होते हैं जो रोड शो करते हैं और वो रोड शो करके एक वैल्यू को सेंस करते हैं. सो दे विल टॉक टू वैरायटी ऑफ इन्वेस्टर्स, फंड हाउसेस, ब्रोकरेज हाउसेस, रिटेल इन्वेस्टर्स, क्वालिफाइड इंस्टीट्यूशनल बायर्स एटसेट्रा. वो उसको सेंस करके एक वैल्यू निकालते हैं. देयरफॉर आप देखोगे कभी भी डीआरएचपी में आपको एक वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट नहीं मिलेगी बिकॉज अ डिफाइंड वैल्यूएशन इज नॉट प्रिपेयर्ड, राइट? एंड इसीलिए इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर्स उस वैल्यू को असेस करते हैं एंड तभी आपको वो एक रेंज देते हैं. एंड अगर इन्वेस्टर को या मार्केट को वो वैल्यू हाई लगती है तो जो इन्वेस्टमेंट है वो पुअर हो जाता है, उसमें सब्सक्रिप्शन कम होते हैं. और अगर वो वैल्यू रीजनेबल लगता है तो उसमें अच्छा होता है. आज सोच के देखिए, सो व्हाई इज नाइका डूइंग वेल एंड व्हाई इज पेटीएम डूइंग बैड? Nobody is talking about their market capitalization. हम लोग ये बोल रहे हैं कि नाइका में लोगों ने पैसे कमाए, पेटीएम में लोगों ने पैसे गवाए, right? It is possible that Paytm is more valuable than Nykaa, but then the entry price for Paytm was higher than that of Nykaa, plain and simple. Right? आज बाजार में 10,000 शेयर्स लिस्टेड है ना, हम लोग सब में ट्रेड क्यों नहीं करते? सो वो तो कॉन्सेप्ट ही वही है कि डिमांड सप्लाई पे वैल्यू ड्राइव होती है.
ऐसा समझिए, सर अनलिस्टेड कंपनी में हम जाते हैं, समझिए लिस्टेड कंपनी नहीं है, कोई अनलिस्टेड कंपनी है. जैसे आपने बोला कि फेसबुक ने व्हाट्सएप को एक्वायर किया, तो देयर वाज अ नेगोशिएशन बिटवीन अ परचेजर एंड अ सेलर कि इस रेंज में अपने एक्वायर करेंगे एंड परचेजर हैज डिटरमाइंड द वैल्यू कि ये वैल्यू मुझे सही लगता है. नाउ इन केस ऑफ अनलिस्टेड कंपनी आई हैव बीन गिवन टू वैल्यू डिटरमाइन द वैल्यू ऑफ अ कंपनी व्हिच इज एक्वायरिंग अनलिस्टेड कंपनी ओनली. अब मैंने परचेजर के हिसाब से वैल्यू निकाल के दे दिया, ठीक है. अब उसके ऊपर क्या लायबिलिटी आ सकता है बीइंग आईबीबीआई का या फिर अदर इनकम टैक्स एक्ट के हिसाब से कि तुम ये वैल्यू को कैसे जस्टिफाई किए? इवन मेरे पास डॉक्यूमेंट है जस्टिफाई करने के लिए, बट क्या स्टैट्यूटरी लिटिगेशन आ सकता है क्या वैल्यूअर के ऊपर भी कि तुम इस वैल्यू को सही नहीं है?
हाँ, so there is very interesting question, right? So first of all, there is no what should I say? So there is going to be a very strong differentiation between the transaction price and the value that a valuer arrives. Okay, हमारे registered valuer के concept में the regulation says that we have to determine the fair value. So for example, अगर आज मुझे Facebook ये कहता या WhatsApp ये कहता कि भाई मेरी वैल्यूएशन करके दो, तो मैं 19 बिलियन नहीं निकाल सकता था, राइट? मेरे पास में ऐसा कोई प्रेसिडेंट नहीं था जिससे इसकी वैल्यू 19 बिलियन आती. अब वो कितनी आती है मुझे नहीं मालूम, बट 19 तो शायद नहीं आती, राइट? So
बट सर मैं
what
बोलना
the-
चाहूँ कि आपको समझिए कन्विंस कर लिया गया।
नहीं मैं आ रहा हूँ सर,
हाँ।
आपका क्वेश्चन को मैं पूरा समझ गया। इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू अंडरस्टैंड दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट वेरी वेल, राइट? सो रजिस्टर्ड वैल्यूअर का काम होता है फेयर वैल्यू निकालना। व्हाट इज अ फेयर वैल्यू? अ वैल्यू दैट एनीबडी वुड बी विलिंग टू पे, हैविंग कंप्लीट नॉलेज अबाउट द एसेट। दैट्स द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ फेयर वैल्यू, राइट? सो मेरा काम है फेयर वैल्यू निकालना। अभी मान लीजिए मैंने फेयर वैल्यू निकाला 100, जो कंपनी है उसको वो वैल्यू जम नहीं रही, तो वो क्या करता है, वो इन्वेस्टर के पास जाता है, बोलता है सर मेरी कंपनी की वैल्यू है 150, और अगर वो उस 150 पे इन्वेस्टर को कन्विंस कर लेता है, इन्वेस्टर हाँ बोल देता है, तो वो मेरी रिपोर्ट को सेट असाइड कर देता है। वो दूसरे वैल्यूअर के पास चला जाता है, आपके पास चला जाता है, और आपको बोलता है कि देखो साहब मेरी 150 की वैल्यू है, मैंने इन्वेस्टर से बात कर ली है और इन्वेस्टर ने अग्री कर लिया है कि इस कंपनी की वैल्यू 150 है। अभी आपको क्या करना है, आपका काम बन जाता है सिर्फ एक कंप्लायंस रिपोर्ट बनाने का। नाउ यू सिंपली हैव टू मेक अ कंप्लायंस रिपोर्ट। अभी मियां बीवी राजी तो क्या करेगा काजी? अभी परचेजर सेलर इज रेडी टू बाय और ट्रांजैक्ट इन दैट शेयर फॉर 150, आप 100 की वैल्यू निकाल के दोगे, आपको आपकी फीस नहीं देगा, तो आप क्या करते हो, वो 150 की वैल्यू को आप जस्टिफाई कर देते हो, राइट? उस पे आपके ऊपर सर, are you getting the point? So from a legal obligation point of view, as long as the valuer has followed the appropriate procedures, unke assumptions agar appropriate hain, so there are a lot of case laws which gives immunity to the valuer कि वो कोर्ट्स जो है उस नंबर पे कभी नहीं जाते, राइट? कोर्ट्स ये कहते हैं कि आपने अपने डिलिजेंस के साथ में काम किया, आपने अपने प्रोसीजर्स को फंडामेंटली सही अप्लाई किया, तो आपका वैल्यू सामने वाला ले या नहीं ले ये उसका कॉल है, आपका कॉल नहीं। आज एक चीज बताइए, आप मान लीजिए हम इस वैल्यूअर वाले एनवायरनमेंट को स्टॉक मार्केट में ले आते हैं, 60% वैल्यू इंक्रीज हो गया स्टॉक मार्केट का, कोई वैल्यूअर को इंसेंटिव देने थोड़ी ना आया, नहीं आया। 60% गिर जाएगा तो आप वैल्यूअर को खोजेंगे, भैया मेरे नुकसान हो गए इस वैल्यूअर की वजह से, राइट? सो यू कैन नॉट हैव ओनली वन साइड ऑफ द स्टोरी. So as long as the valuer has done his job with appropriate diligence and procedures in place, no problem with the valuer.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes. So yes, any other question? I think that's what I want, right? I mean, I have questions. मैं तो otherwise अपने slides पे बोलता चला जाऊँ. So let's say हम लोग example ले रहे थे, right? That if there is a chat-based company, right? इसकी 1.6 million users हैं, इसके पास कोई revenue नहीं है. How would you value this company? If you are very lucky, आपको WhatsApp की वैल्यूएशन मिल गई, राइट? अभी मैंने कहा कि ये वैल्यू सही नहीं है, बट आपके पास बेंचमार्क तो है. सो द फाउंडर ऑफ दिस चैट ऐप,
लैपटॉप एक घंटा बंद मत करना,
द फाउंडर ऑफ दिस चैट ऐप will refer to this value. The value was $19 billion, 450 million users, तो $42 का वैल्यू आ गया per user, राइट? Let's 75 का एक्सचेंज रेट पकड़ते हैं. सो INR में 3,100 rupees per user, right? तो मेरी वैल्यू कितनी हो गई? 3,166 into 60. ये देखिए, ये वैल्यू जम रही है क्या आपको?
नारंगी और ये रहा
506 करोड़ की वैल्यूएशन देंगे क्या इसको? नहीं देंगे ना सर? For 1.6 million users, would you give a valuation of 506 crores? Are you with me? Right? So now everything will boil down to the scalability discount. Sir, WhatsApp has 450 million users. You have 16 million users. So इसको आप डिस्काउंट लगाओ इस पे, राइट? आप तो 450 million users तक पहुंच ही नहीं पाओगे. So now I might apply some sort of a discount. This discount could be 80%, it could be 90%, right? Whatever. So let's say इसके ऊपर मैंने 90% का डिस्काउंट लगाया, तो ये वैल्यू आ गया 306. So instead of 3166, now I value this as 316. वैल्यू गिर के 50 करोड़ पे आ गई, right? So it is always going to be very subjective. Now as a valuer, आपको ये समझना है कि सर ये डिस्काउंट जो है ये मैं 90% लगाऊं, 80% लगाऊं, 99% लगाऊं, कितना लगाऊं? I could apply a 99% discount to it. So I could say what is 16 million divided by 450 million? 0.03% है ना. So what I could do, ये जो scalability discount है, इसको मैं ऐसे भी लगा सकता हूँ. लीजिए 1 करोड़ की वैल्यू होगी. Now, as a valuer, I would have to assess what is a realistic value. This still appears to be a realistic value for me. Now I have to understand, I have to explain why I would have taken this discount, right? Why I would take a 90% discount. So WhatsApp is already there with 450 million users. Is WhatsApp doing bad? Why is there a need for another user or another chat-based company? Right? That's the biggest question that I have to understand. I'm sure you must have heard about Hike, H-I-K-E, Hike. सुना है आप लोगों ने किसी ने? It was a chat-based app founded by Kevin Mittal, who is the son of Bharti Mittal, Sunil Bharti Mittal.
Yes,
right?
yes, sir.
Now, in February 2021, this app officially got shut down. But at one point, it had a valuation of $1 billion. $1 billion की valuation से गिर के उन्होंने app को shut down कर दिया. क्यों? There was significant value addition. So of course, people who had invested money, they lost money, right? Because at some point the investment dried out. So again, to cut a long story short, when we are looking at startup companies, right, it is a very risky game to play. It is not a game for everybody. You have to understand that only 5 to 7% of your investments might succeed. And earlier, a startup investor used to have an investment horizon of a very long period, right? They used to have investment horizon of 8 to 10 years. Now they don't have 8 to 10 years of horizon. आपने मेरी कंपनी में पैसे लगाए, 50 लाख रुपए लगाए, right? At a valuation of 10 crores. मेरा second round होगा, आप उसमें से 25 लाख निकाल लो, with maybe a 200% return, right? So आपने अपने पैसे कमा लिए. Now you put this money into the second company, and that rotation, that churning is happening very, very fast, extremely fast now. Okay. So quickly going through some of the other methods. So there's a venture capitalist method which says that आपने target profit assess करना. You look at the target profit 5 years from now. Let's say 45 crores. Target P multiple 20. So at 5 years from now, the value would be 900 crores. Now today, your discount rate, your expected return from that investment is 35%. So उसको आज के डेट पे वैल्यू करके लेके आओ. So कंपनी की वैल्यू होगी 200 करोड़. अभी सोचो कितना टाइम लगा इस कैलकुलेशन को करने. Right? It's a 5-minute calculation, and everything boils down to what is the expected profit 5 years from now. That's it. Right? So if the investor is convinced that 5 years from now your profit would be about 50 crores, तो 200-250 करोड़ की वैल्यूएशन आराम से दे देता है आज के डेट पे. Right? So it's again, there are different methods, and it's a risky play. So I'm going to skip a couple of methods, right? We have to remember that just because one edtech company became a unicorn, every company will not become a unicorn, right? So if you are a valuer, or you are an investor, or you are the founder, you have to keep that in mind. That's a very important thing. Right? Any question on startups, right? We can spend another few minutes on the M&As if there's no question on startup. Okay. So this is how a decent valuation would look like. Okay. चलिए, M&As पे आते हैं, right? So lot of mergers and acquisitions. Now, when we look at mergers and acquisitions, sometimes we're looking at a group company merger and acquisition, which I'm sure many of you may already be involved in. And then, of course, there's sometimes we look at mergers and acquisitions, which is not part of the group companies, where there are two independent companies which are getting merged, right? For example, Vodafone got merged with Idea, and now we have another company which is Vodafone Idea. Walmart acquired Flipkart, that is an acquisition, right? So of course, Walmart acquired more than 75% stake in Flipkart. And then there can be demerger, where a company hives off one of its segment, right? So merger, typically when the two companies are merging together, usually it is done by negotiation, it's friendly. Acquisition, could be hostile or friendly. So for example, we've heard of Mindtree acquisition, which was a hostile acquisition, one of the few first hostile acquisitions in India. And then demerger, so where one company hives off. So we constantly hear the investors requesting ITC to demerge some of its businesses so that the value can be uncovered, right? So those are the three types of concepts. Of course, we call it by different names. There's amalgamation, slump sale, asset purchase, right? Absorption, and so on. So, hoti kya hai? Why do companies go into mergers and acquisitions? Again, we talk about Byju's, right? Now, I'm sure you must have heard Byju's acquired Akash Institute recently for $1 billion, right? Now, why would Byju's acquire Akash Institute? Any idea? Any thoughts? क्यों acquire करेगा $1 billion पे आकाश इंस्टीट्यूट? So think about it, right? Byju's is a very strong startup company in the edtech space. Akash Institute is a very established player in the competitive exam preparation space. So Akash Institute had almost 200 centers across the country where it prepares thousands of students for IIT, JEE, and medical entrance exams. And Byju's, of course, was a competition to Akash Institute. Now, at some point, a pure online play may not work, right? Because there's a lot of students jinko bahut detailed handholding chahiye hoti hai. So, if Byju's had to go in for a complete physical mode of operations, then imagine the considerations that Byju's would have had, right? So, उनको बहुत सारा real estate acquire करना पड़ता. They would have to, acquire meaning either lease or rent or buy or whatever, but they would have to set up a lot of real estate properties, right? उनको furnishing कराना है, and then you have to have marketing people who would market for, who would do the marketing for all of this. You would need content, you would need trainers, right? And after all of this, you would still be ending up competing with Akash Institute and some of the other players, right? And उतना करने के बाद में पता नहीं होता था कि whether this will be a successful model or not. So in order to beat all of that competition, they say that let us acquire another company. So my entry into the market is very inorganic, right? It allows me to grow inorganically and scale up faster within the same industry or in another industry. And of course, so a very good pay would help a company acquire another company. Now, you know what? 70% of the acquisitions in the world are not successful. Now, what do you mean by acquisitions not being successful? मतलब क्या होता है इसका? Right? So, for example, आज हमने जब इस WhatsApp acquisition के बारे में बात करी, so if Facebook has paid 19 billion, right? ऐसा हो ही सकता है ना कि 19 billion उसको recover नहीं कर पाएगा वो? Possible? So, what is the consequence when a company acquires another company? So, if the book value of the company is 1 and the acquisition value of that company is 5, 4 comes in the form of goodwill, right? Yes or no? So, if a company has acquired another company and the company is not getting that benefit, the goodwill has to be impaired. And more than 70% of the cases, long-term statistic I'm telling you, has led to a write-off of goodwill because the synergies or the benefits from that acquisition never came through. And some of the flagship, some of the most popular companies which has made worst acquisitions is Microsoft, right? Under the earlier former CEO Steve Ballmer, they had so many acquisitions and most of those acquisitions had to be written. So why do companies go in for acquisitions? Of course, there's undervaluation. So some companies are cheaper to acquire. There's diversification. And most importantly, most common reason is synergy. What is synergy? 1 + 1 is more than 2. So दो लोग मिल करके हम लोग जो काम कर सकते हैं वो अकेले नहीं कर सकते. Plain and simple. Now, that's where the companies end up paying a high amount of money, right? And so I'm sure you must have heard of Tata Chorus. So Tata Chorus acquisition. Yes. So Chorus is a steel company which was based out of Europe and Tata being the Indian company, right? it was a very, very ambitious acquisition because Chorus was much bigger in size as compared to Tata. So Tata had to borrow money to acquire Chorus, right? And I think that happened in the early 2000s, and it was said that it's a very ambitious acquisition. Things may not turn out. Company might fail. Loan kaise chukayenge? We call it leveraged buyout, LBO. So from that acquisition, right? Of course, Tata proved wrong to the whole world, and it is considered to be a good acquisition. Similarly, when Tata Motors acquired Jaguar Land Rover, once again, it was a very ambitious acquisition. But do you see, has Tata replaced Jaguar logo with Tata logo? So if you buy a Jaguar car, if you see a Jaguar car, do you see a Tata logo on it? It said, now it's my company's. I will remove that Jaguar logo and I will put a Tata logo there. Right? Do you see that happening? You wouldn't. Because if that Jaguar Land Rover brand has its own positioning. So earlier, it's a very interesting story that when Coca-Cola acquired Thumbs Up, it wanted to kill the brand, because Thumbs Up was a strong competition to Coca-Cola. But then it realized that no, Thumbs Up is a bigger brand in India than Coca-Cola. So it brought that brand back because Coca-Cola itself was not doing well. But at the same time, it has not allowed Thumbs Up to go outside of India. Because of course, Coca-Cola did not want its own brand to be sacrificed. Right? So when the companies acquire another companies, there are some of the very interesting strategic factors, right? That even if I'm acquiring another company, I don't want to kill that company, because if I kill it, I will not get the synergies through, right? So that's a very important aspect to be kept in mind whenever there's a acquisition happening. So while on one hand, if I am merging the other company completely, I get benefits in terms of manpower, taxes, operational efficiencies, asset management, etc. But at the same time, do I really kill the brand or do I continue with the brand is a very important consideration, right? So in most cases, companies merge the other companies, but they keep the brands intact and they keep the key managerial people intact, because killing of the brand and letting go of people are two major reasons why M&As have not been successful in the past. From a legal perspective, section 230, 234 says that you need a registered valuer report whenever there's a merger or an acquisition happening, right? Under income tax, you have amalgamation. Of course, there's no valuation report required. Section 232 again says that you need a report adopted by the directors which specifies the share exchange ratio, and if there's any need for a report with respect to valuation, it should be taken from an expert. So section 247 says that all the valuation under the Companies Act is required to be done by a registered valuer. It also says that all the appointment of registered valuer must be done by the audit committee or by the board of directors. So one common practice that we are seeing is that there's a lot of outsourcing of valuation engagements that's happening, but we need to ensure that the valuer is appointed by the board of director or by the audit committee. Otherwise, there's a violation of section 247, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Again, we see that a lot of cases people don't take section 281 NOC from the tax authorities. So when there's a merger happening, right, there can be any pending tax proceedings. So that tax proceedings could come later, and therefore it's important that we get a section 281 NOC from the tax authorities so that there is no pending tax proceedings from the previous company, and therefore the purchaser is not having to suffer because of the earlier liabilities, right? Indemnities and warranties, again, very important point that whenever there's a merger happening, one needs to ensure that you get indemnities and warranties signed from the seller, because again, as a purchaser, you don't want that any past liabilities would now have to be settled or would have to be dealt with by the purchasers. Now, of course, there can be a known liability, and there can be a known liability which is not factored into valuation, right? So, for example, we know that there is a tax obligation, we know that there are vendor payments, we know that there are loan outstanding that has to be paid. Now, especially in case of litigations, a lot of times we see that the selling company has got some loans, some tax obligations which are under litigation. Now, of course, from a valuation standpoint, you would want to consider that as an obligation. But now the seller might say that, hey, all this demand is completely baseless and we are very sure कि ये demand materialize नहीं होगी, तो आप इसकी liability मत treat करो, right? So now you have two options. A, कि आप उसको defer कर दीजिए payment को, कि ये जब तक clear नहीं होगा तब तक ये payment आपके पास जाएगा नहीं, और या फिर आप उस पे indemnity ले लीजिए कि अगर ये liability materialize होती है, then the seller will have to pay that liability, right? So it's a very important point that should be kept in mind in terms of indemnities and warranties. Of course, you can have time frames for indemnity. It could be 18 months to 36 months. And there can be a limitation in terms of amount also, कि इतना maximum warranty जो है वो seller bear करेगा, right? जो भी future में आएगी उसकी. So any practical issues that someone wants to share that comes across in terms of mergers and acquisitions, which you want to highlight or share with the other participants also? Share the PPT, sir. So around practical issues around valuation, one in terms of goodwill. So बहुत बार हम लोगों के पास में रिक्वेस्ट आती है कि विकास, we need to value the company also, we need to value the goodwill also. मेरे को goodwill बताओ कितना आ रहा है, right? So one thing we have to remember that most of the goodwill calculations that we studied in school, college, BCom, right? That goodwill calculation is completely irrelevant from a practical standpoint now, because the environment has changed completely. What is goodwill? So goodwill होता क्या है या कैसे calculate करते हैं? So let's say the purchase consideration in the company is, let's say, 2 million, right? What we have to look at is the book value of the company. So if the book value of the company is 1 million, what you have to do is you have to calculate the fair value. So let's say the fair value is 1.5 million, right? So now the goodwill would be 2 million minus 1.5 million, right? Sorry. So यही goodwill आना है. Goodwill is going to be a balancing figure. Now, there is no other method, there is no other need for calculating goodwill. अभी आपको ये fair value करना पड़ेगा. You will have to get a purchase price allocation report. Now, very interesting thing that has happened recently is that now goodwill is not allowable as a deduction or as amortization under the tax laws. Income tax recently, as far as I know, has said that you cannot take amortization of goodwill for tax benefit. There is no tax benefit allowed there. Now that gives an incentive to not record goodwill. Now, of course, अगर goodwill है तो है, आप उसमें क्या कर सकते हैं? But what has happened is that in terms of your purchase price allocation, now create or identify intangible assets, right? Now this intangible asset can be customer list, it can be brand, it can be our patents, technology, etc. Right? So earlier, these intangible assets were usually not created. Everything would simply go under the carpet of goodwill. But now we will see that gradually, since goodwill is not getting recognized for tax purposes, right, we will see creation of a lot of intangible assets, and those intangible assets, of course, would be allowable as deductions under the income tax, right? So there's going to be amortization applicable for those assets. We will see that goodwill will increasingly probably go down, and we will see creation of new intangible assets in the financial statements as a result of purchase price application, right? Has anyone come across this thing already? I mean, have you seen a situation like this? That gives a very strong reason for brand valuation, right? And we've done a lot of brand valuation. We are doing a lot of brand valuations already. So that's a good area of opportunity if you are a valuer, and that's a workaround if you are a advisor or a company who's getting into mergers and acquisitions, right? Now, how do you value synergies? Now, again, this is not from a regulatory standpoint, but when you're a consultant to a transaction and आपको synergies देखनी है, तो आप synergies को value करेंगे कैसे, right? हमको पता तो है कि 1 + 1 is equal to more than 2, but how do you calculate? So the best way to handle or to calculate synergies is to follow a with and without method, So identify the value of the acquiring company as it is, जो चल रही है जैसे उसकी वैल्यू हम लोग निकालते हैं, एंड हम लोग बोलते हैं कि अगर एक्विजिशन हो जाता है तो हमको क्या मिलता है. So we might get some reduction in costs, we might get some additional revenues, we might have some additional technology which can open new business avenues for us. So after the acquisition, what will be the value of this company, right? So with and without, so दोनों की जो difference होगी, that difference amounts to the valuation of synergies, which is again now only when you value synergies, from the calculation of synergies only the goodwill valuation would flow, right? But synergies calculation is done as a with or without. So value the company after the acquisition, assuming all the benefits have flown to the company, and value the company as it is, and the difference is the valuation of the synergies. हम लोग जब एक्विजिशन करते हैं तो बहुत सारा कंट्रोल इशू आता है, राइट? व्हेन वी एक्वायर अनदर कंपनी, देयर इज अ कंट्रोल दैट वी गेट, एंड sometimes there is a control premium, right? So there is sometimes there can be a discount, sometimes there can be a premium, right? Now what is this? Why is this calculated? Is it reasonable? Is it payable? Not payable, right? So one simple explanation for a control premium is that, let's say I am valuing a company from the market price perspective. There's a listed company and मैं उसकी acquisition कर रहा हूँ. So I know that, let's say Reliance Industries is currently trading at 2200 rupees. Example, hypothetical. So if the company has, if one company had to, or if one person had to buy the shares of Reliance Industries, that shares would be easily bought at 2200 rupees, which is the fair value of the company, right? Indicative, hypothetical example. Now, if the same person has to buy 5 crore shares of Reliance Industries, and he is buying that 5 crore shares from the market, would he be able to buy those shares at 2200 rupees? He would not be able to buy at 2200 rupees because the demand for the stock would have gone up, right? Somebody is constantly buying the shares. So there's a high demand, which is obviously going to lead to an increase in the value or increase in the price, right? So very simple logic as to why there should be a control premium is purely because of demand and supply, number one. Number two, when we value a company using discounted cash flow, once again, we are getting the value of the company as a whole, irrespective of whether it's 100 shares or a 5 crore shares that will be transacted, right? So again, if there's a significant transaction or there's a significant control that is flowing in, the control premium should be added to the value of the company, right? But this control premium is not the value of the company. We need to understand that this control premium is only applicable if there is an acquisition that is happening. If there is no acquisition, it is not the fair value of the company. So we have to understand the difference between the control value and the fair value, right? The fair value is not the control value. And if you're calling it as a fair value, you will not add any marketability discount or any control premium to it, or not adjust it for marketability or control premium. Another question that comes up is the promoter contribution, right? So when you are acquiring another company, is there a factor where the promoter also has to be assessed or not? So if I am a startup company, right, and you are acquiring my company, I say I will sell you the company, but I will not come along. Do you think that will change the value of my company? It should change the value of my company, right? Because if I am the promoter, the current valuation of our company is driven by my presence, right? Whether it is my business development expertise or my technical expertise or my employee handling expertise. My employees are loyal to me. My clients are looking at interacting with me. I am bringing in technical expertise and so on. So if I sell you the company, but I don't come along, versus I sell you the company and I come along with you, is there going to be a difference in value? Definitely there should be a difference in value, right? So here, whenever there's a merger or acquisition happening, we also need to see whether the promoters are also going to be working in the acquired company, in the merged entity. If yes, then nothing needs to be done. And it is counterintuitive. If the promoters will continue to work in the other company, then nothing needs to be done. But if the promoters exit from that company at the time of acquisition, then there is a promoter contribution that should be deducted from the value of the company. And of course, the promoter will get less money as compared to the previous scenario. Try to recall most of the acquisitions that we have discussed, right? When Facebook acquired WhatsApp, the founder of WhatsApp continued in Facebook board. When Byju's acquired Akash Institute founders now are present with Byju's. When Byju's acquired White Hat Junior, Karan Bajaj, the founder of WhatsApp, White Hat Junior, continued to work with WhatsApp, with Byju's, right? When Flipkart acquired Walmart, one of the promoters continued to work with Flipkart, with Walmart. But in most of these cases, 1 to 2 years down the line, the founders exit, right? Now, is this a sudden decision? Usually the answer is no. So the founders continue to, so that's usually a part of the negotiation, that we will go along only for a year, where we will help you transition, we will manage the employees, we will manage the clients, and after that we will exit. So look at Flipkart's acquisition of Walmart, right? Flipkart founders are very, very intelligent in that sense, extremely smart. They knew that probably that company would have never become a very successful IPO. So both the original founders have left the company and now are angel investors, or they are investors in their own sense, right? They are not operating Flipkart anymore, because of course it's a loss-making machine. So you have to calculate the promoter's contribution. How do you calculate that is a different story, and we're not discussing that now, but it should be identified. And probably the last part, I mean, when we look at cross-border mergers and acquisitions, how do you look at cross-border? If you are acquiring, so if an Indian company is acquiring a Singapore company, right, how do you look at the currency, right? In what currency would you value that company? So you should value that company in the Singapore currency, and the discount rate should also be the Singapore company discount rate, not the discount rate of the investor. Because if you are valuing the company in the Indian rupees, then you will have to create all the forecasts in Indian rupees, which will require estimation of not only the revenues and expenses, but also of the interest rates or the exchange rates, which can lead to a lot of confusion, a lot of estimation errors, and therefore the valuation should be done in the same currency in which the asset is generating its value, right? Same for the discount rate. And yeah, so kind of skipping this. The last, when you are calculating the share exchange ratio, right? The share exchange ratio is given by the value of the transferor company divided by the value of the transferee company. So transferor is the seller and transferee is the purchaser. So you can look at seller, purchaser, target acquirer, acquirer, acquiree, amalgamate, demerged company, resulting company, whatever you call it. But the seller is the transferor company. So you look at that, their value divided by the value of the transferee company. And of course, when if it's a listed company that is involved, again, registered valuers are required, and you would have to apply all the three approaches. So the income approach, the cost approach, and the market approach, assign weightages to them, and you calculate the share exchange ratio. Okay. So yeah, that's about it from my end. I've kept another probably 10 minutes. If there's any question at all, thank you for your patient hearing. And Vikash ji, Naveen ji.
Vikash, good afternoon. Vikash ji has dropped out because I think he's having some technical issues. So in case I have joined maybe half an hour back, so I don't see any questions in the chat. Do you see any questions in the chat?
Oh, no, I see one question which says, what factors need to be considered if one has to merge a company doing a separate business with itself? Amit ji, you want to unmute yourself and explain your question, please?
Amit ji, if you can raise your hand, then I can unmute you. Or and in fact, anyone else, if you have any questions, please raise your hands so that I can unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question.
I think they can unmute themselves as well if they're still around.
I can actually go ahead and. So I've given permission to everyone. They can now unmute themselves if they wish to.
Okay. So yeah, I'm not sure what that question really means. If one company has to merge a company doing a separate business with itself, I'm not sure what that question means. I mean, if you can elaborate. And meanwhile, if anybody has any other question, I'm happy to take that up. If not, then we're good.
I think that's it then.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yes.
Neeraj Agarwal, are you around? No. Okay. Bajrang bhaiya.
Rahul.
I am here.
Neeraj.
Neeraj, go ahead, please offer a vote of thanks on behalf of the association.
Right. No, I've been hearing this deliberation on valuations since the start, and our learned speaker has covered extensively.
No, actually, I'm going out tomorrow.
Hello.
Neeraj, go ahead. We
audible
can hear you now. Yeah, we
Yeah.
can hear you now.
So this is an area of wherein all of us has doubts that how such extensive valuations have been arrived at, and our learned speaker has rightfully mentioned that it is not only the duty of the valuers to ascertain whether the valuation is proper or not, because that is based on the information provided to him. Ultimately, it is a market driven, and again we have to be very careful while in dealings with such mergers, acquisitions, as well as evaluations when involved either on our own or for our clients. So I thank our learned speaker for taking time out on Sunday morning and sharing these wonderful aspects about the evaluation. Thank you, sir, for your time, and I thank all the participants today who participated in this program of ours, and hope to see you again in our next program. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Neeraj.
Neeraj, Vikash is our member only.
I know, but for today he is our guest speaker.
Yes.
So, so due respect should be given to our learned speaker.
No, of course. Thank you, Vikash. Thank you for the wonderful deliberation.
Bajrang ji, you are unmuted. I think you're trying to say something.
Hello.
Yes.
One more announcement. Our association is organizing annual picnic dated 2 January 2022 on Sunday. So I request all the delegates as well as speakers here, Vikash Goel ji, please join our picnic. I assure you that we enjoy a lot on picnic. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
I think everybody looks forward to our annual picnic, and therefore anybody who is not attending that would be really missing a great opportunity. So it again is a great opportunity for all of us to reconnect, and I'm sure all of us would be joining in that picnic, including Vikash ji.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Vikash.
definitely.
Vikash ji, I was actually disconnected for a while because my net was not working at the moment. Right now, okay. The session was very nice, and actually it was a very good session. We will try next time for the physical this type of seminars.